everyone. Welcome to HR Works, brought to you by BLR. I'm your host, Steve Bruce. HR Works provides clear, relevant, actionable information on topics that matter to HR professionals. When you're armed with best practices, plus the knowledge to keep your organization in compliance, HR works. Retention, engagement, and branding, the trio of topics that are gaining in importance for all HR managers. BLR recently completed a survey on these topics, which was sponsored by SilkRoad. To help us gain additional perspective, we've asked SilkRoad's Mimi Jerkan to join us. Mimi serves as Talent Activation Director for SilkRoad, where she works with clients on challenges of talent management strategy, bridging organizational gaps, recommending new processes, training development, and communication strategies. Mimi has 15 years of experience in human resources and 8 years of process improvement with a practice concentration in talent acquisition strategy. She is both PHR and Six Sigma certified. Mimi, welcome to HR Works.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
So we asked our survey respondents to define engagement, and they mentioned that employees share an emotional commitment, they care about their work, they're interested in what's going on, they go out of their way, and they're excited to come to work. How do you define engagement?
What I've experienced working with clients and reading various HR articles and studies, I think it's rather similar. I would define engagement as basically a workplace approach, a strategy, if you will, that results in the right environment for all members of an organization. So what I mean by that is a continuous experience where employees understand their role and impact and have a deepened connection to the organization and are really invested in its success.
All right, great. And one of the insights from the Retention, Engagement, and Branding report said 40% of respondents said that employee engagement is, quote, the key to our success moving forward, unquote. However, a recent Harvard Business Review article suggests that employee engagement is bad for employers because highly engaged employees are wedded to the status quo and won't seek to change it. How do you respond to that?
Yes, I'm familiar with that article, but I feel that perhaps there was a commingling of the two distinct terms, employee engagement versus employee satisfaction. So for me, like, employee engagement is not the same as employee satisfaction. While an engaged employee are satisfied with their jobs, satisfied employees are not necessarily engaged. So I see why the HBR suggested what it did, but I think it's kind of confusing. They're confusing two things. If I was to historically look at the way, or any of us really would look at it, satisfaction was measured, but it's not any longer the metric of success. Employees may be satisfied, but they're still looking for jobs. And why is that? And we really think that it's because they're not activated. Do you remember the old mantra, well, maybe not that old, a company is as good as its employees, or employees are your greatest asset? Have you ever heard those terms? I'm sure you have.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, it's now employees are your only asset. So there are real incentives to invest in employees as the returns are greater than the employee commitment, because those returns are greater, rather, on employee commitment, motivation, productivity, and ultimately profit. And in some cases, and I think we forget nonprofits a lot, achieving deliberate objectives.
So engagement or activation, historically that's been a challenge for many organizations. And the survey highlighted three particular challenges: limited budget, not enough time for activities, and consistency of communication. So this might be a tall order, but what are some low-budget ways to improve engagement that are quick to do and easy to maintain and facilitate?
Mm-hmm. I think some of those low-budget ways would be like a kudos app, say a personalized experience app, being able to choose from a company store gamifying collaboration somehow, inclusion and culture in some ways. So let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. For instance, our sales development team at SilkRoad, they leverage a weekly and monthly contest for sales activities where they determine what the parameters are and what the prizes will be. So because they're able to have a say and an incentive that they care about, they're much more invested in the desired outcome, rather. So it's really, which is really driving our organizational outcomes in this case. Very low budget. Didn't really cost much.
All right, that's very helpful. Now, as far as organizing for engagement, who owns engagement or activation? Is that an HR job?
Engagement, and I'm going to call it activation, I think, from now on, is indicative of the culture, and it's not just an HR issue. While successful employee strategy positively affects a whole raft of HR measures, it really affects also a whole number of business measures, including top employee or high-performing employee retention and support, and really does support incredible growth. That said, let me just say this. HR can be the catalyst that sparks the movement and can help attack these from a number of angles, like working with executive leadership. So here, I'm stressing that HR must work with the C-suite and line managers to redefine work expectations, to provide more support for employees. Activation determines the success of organizations going forward, and it relates to empowering employees to drive innovation, maybe increase its speed to market, and as well as organizational initiatives.
So let's be a little clear about the impact that the C-suite has on activation. What's their particular role in creating an activation-centric culture?
I think the C-suite has a great impact on engagement, and it truly starts from the top down. It's really simple, and it comes down to two things. Number one, make employees feel important, and number two, transparency with an exclamation point. And I'd like to expand on that, if you don't mind, a little bit.
Sure.
So making employees feel important. Executives know what they do matters, and that knowledge comes with the position. Their decisions really can have a dramatic and sometimes obvious effect on the company. We have all seen that, right? When you know that what you do carries that kind of weight and importance, then you're naturally more engaged in your role. So while knowing the stakes is a given for executives, for other employees, maybe 3 or 4 layers removed from those executives, the stakes are not so clear, or may not be so clear. And that is precisely the problem. Study after study has shown that for employees to feel engaged, they need to know that what they do is important. They're just not coming to work, every day and completing tasks and then leaving for that day. The things that they do every day are moving the needle, working towards some goal or another, but perhaps in a less obvious way than the doings of those at the top. But every employee's contribution impacts the company, and if that is not already being communicated, it really needs to be. So my second item on transparency is executives have a transparent view of the company. Because the execs have that view, employees need a similar view. So the second lesson goes hand in hand with the first. Not only do executives know their job is important, but they have a transparent view of the company. It allows them to see directly how the things that they're doing are affecting the performance. So, so this kind of transparency at all levels of an organization, it really could increase engagement. It might not be possible or even smart to open the books to all employees, but luckily you don't have to do that in order to bring more transparency. To be honest with employees, about their hard work and on a quarterly basis, it allows them to join the conversation in showing where your business is and where it wants to go and how those employees can help one get there. So by proactively providing employees with information about their specific impact on the company, whether it's dashboards, team meetings, one-on-ones, town halls, etc., I think it really lets employees know that that nothing of importance is being kept from them and how important they are to your team and to the organization. While employees don't really need that corner office, treating employees like executives in their roles can go a long way in improving engagement and activation strategy in the future.
Okay, good. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about measurement. The survey, in fact, uncovered the fact that 34% said they measure engagement or activation. But why is it important to do that measurement? How do you do that measurement, and how do you benchmark your engagement and activation over time?
Yeah, I don't think one can afford not to have a pulse on engagement. There's a couple things we need to understand. So I'm going to go back to number one, why are we providing the experience that we promise candidates? And two, are we sustaining that experience throughout the employee's life cycle? Right? So the benchmark to engagement over time, there are some metrics that can be used. One, they can use turnover rates and comparing those to engagement scores. Two, they can use business indicators such as employee productivity, performance, company revenue to demonstrate engagement or activation or lack thereof. Another item would be show outside case studies as proof that employee engagement programs are effective in a wide range of companies and are not just hype. And then lastly, ensure there's a constant review of the three-pronged approach: communication, education, and results.
All right.
There's also, I'm sorry, I also forgot two other things that I wanted to say here, though. I think it's important to show executives the results of employee feedbacks, like from surveys or focus groups or other forms of measuring engagement. But lastly, actively involve the executive team in decisions about employee engagement programs. That's probably one of the best things to do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, arguably, an activated culture would help with retention and engagement and should be communicated as part of a holistic employer brand. However, about 3/4 of the respondents to our survey indicated that they do not have an employment branding program. Were you surprised by that?
I am not. However, in my role, I'm seeing a significant upswing in concerns from our customers and my network of peers and acquaintances. It's clear that companies, organizations are becoming more in touch about their reputation as an employer and their value proposition to its employees. It really is. So I'm not surprised whatsoever.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about employment branding. What impact does employment brand have on engagement or activation and on retention?
You're opening up a can of worms with me right now. So I think too many companies and vendors will still promote employer branding as a talent acquisition and or as a recruitment function. But companies who adopt this perspective usually do this for a lack of awareness of the benefits of an employer branding across their employee life cycle, although they usually take this approach to support their business development of their products, right? So I think organizations that have strong employer brands find success because they match their external brand to their internal brand. So no matter where someone is, like whether that be a prospective customer or prospective employee or current employee comes into contact with your brand, they experience consistency of message and meaning. So focusing employer branding on talent acquisition only usually results in an improved recruitment and onboarding process that has usually very little impact on culture or even business performance due to the lack of consistency in the employee experience because they evolve through their tenure, right? So what I see is siloed organizations, their structures also do little to promote a strategic approach to employer branding because of various reasons, such as maybe HR doesn't get along with marketing and or communications. And I'm disclaimer here, this is just an example. It's not a given for all who are listening, but I think a lot of people can attest to that, right? But Compounding that situation further is executives that have very little awareness of employer branding. So it ends up as an operational project that lives in the HR department, but has very little impact on business performance. A more strategic approach to employer branding requires a strategic perspective towards how a company attracts, engages, retains, and employee brands. So by way of activation, employees feel engaged, which boosts morale, improves retention of all employees.
All right, good. Now you mentioned talent acquisition there. What role does employment branding, as you describe it, play in attracting the right caliber of talent to the company?
Yeah, I think it really plays a big role. It's really a strategic imperative. So I think organizations need to be clear about what they stand for. And what I mean by that is a company has to be very clear on what it stands for, and that its social media and content strategy is aligned with its key strategic objectives. The next thing would be an organization needs to adopt a community concept to their employer branding. And what I mean by that is these companies that adopt a strategic approach across their employment lifecycle and consider all internal and external stakeholders in developing the strategy, they do that through an integrated corporate, consumer, and employer brand. It's really one brand kind of lens. The last item is really an organization needs, and it's not even the last, because the list can go on here, but I want to be cognizant of our time. I think an organization needs to understand that the world has changed. So here's the deal. Advertising is no longer really doesn't have the impact it once did. We're now in the age of the customer, right? So that world is now where consumers' behavior match employees' behaviors, right? How they act at work is predicated on how they act as a consumer. So creating an employee experience that matches to their consumer behavior creates a happier employee experience.
Well, this has all been very helpful. To sum this all up, any final recommendations for companies that want to achieve activation?
Yeah. I think I'd recommend going through an employer brand audit or an employee experience mapping project, and hopefully the results will inspire various leaders to change their perspective and thinking on employer brand strategy and management. Speaking of leaders, make sure to involve the C-suite and frontline managers. And then lastly, create an experience that employees want, because your customer can ultimately become your employee.
Oh, great. So Mimi, thanks so much for joining us today and providing all these very helpful insights.
Yeah, no problem, Steve. Thanks for asking me to join. I really had a great time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Listeners, please let me know what HR Works should cover next. sbruce@blr.com. Thanks for listening. This is Steve Bruce for HR Works.